this that couldn't make it today. All right. Great. Okay, again, thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to our 2026 point in time count training. Let's just dive right in. So, my name is Ava. I am the data and engagement coordinator. My job here is to do the point in time count and coordinate it across the state of Texas. Just to state real quick, our winter pit count date this year is going to be January 22nd, 2026, Thursday, January 22nd. I look forward to that date and working with y'all. For our agenda today, we're going to start with some point in time count basics and then go into some of the methodology, talk about the unsheltered pit planning, sheltered pit planning, and some volunteer best practices really quick, and then some opportunities for collaboration, as well as some next steps as we get into the point in time count season as we approach November and December, as well as January. All right, so here's some of the questions that the pit count aims to answer, as well as a definition of the point in time count. So the point in time count can help us answer a lot of different questions, such as how many people in our community are currently experiencing homelessness, how many of them are families, youth, or veterans, or other subpopulations, as well as some of their characteristics. How old are they? Are they families? Are they youth? Are they single adults? We examine all of this in the point in time count, and what do they report as their causes for homelessness? So the answer to these questions and more can be answered by doing a point in time count in your community. So a simple definition that I like to use is that the point in time count is an unduplicated count on a single night of the people in a community who are experiencing homelessness. So there's four main reasons why we conduct a point in time count annually across our state. So we do it for awareness to, of course, raise community awareness about homelessness and advocate to our local governments. It helps us get the ball rolling when it comes to talking about homelessness in our communities because it gives us some data to actually talk about. Helps us understand the extent of homelessness by identifying trends in homelessness over time, as well as the characteristics of those experiencing homelessness locally. Again, are they families? Are they veterans? Are they youth? We can look at all these demographics and be able to serve our communities a little bit better by understanding exactly those characteristics of those who experience it in our community, as well as to advocate for funding, whether it's local or private government funds, as well as eligibility for federal COC, ESG, and other forms of federal funding. And then for engagement, which I think is the most important aspect of the point in time count, because we're actually going out there and developing personal relationships with those who are homeless and allows us to create a shared sense of responsibility with various stakeholders as we begin to involve different levels of our community. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, though. This slide I'm not going to go into super in detail. It just talks a little bit about what Texas Homeless Network is and the Balance of State COC, which is the geography that we cover in the point in time count. That's demonstrated in this next slide. You can see on the right, we have the region that we cover in our point in time count. On the right, it is those 215 counties. Actually, it's 214 now because we don't have Lubbock in our continuum of care anymore. So it's 214 counties. And then you can see on the left, you can see that we have the actual areas that we covered in the most recent point in time count last year, highlighted by those orange, green, and yellow dots on our state. So I just want to talk quickly a little bit about the process that we use to actually submit the data to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for the point in time count. So because our state is so big and because we have so many counties that we need to cover in the point in time count, we utilize extrapolation. We were able to cover about like 40 counties last year in the point in time count, which is pretty good. But again, there's still, almost like 80, 90 more counties that we need to cover. And HUD requires us to report on the entire geography. So essentially what we do is we extrapolate for those counties that don't participate by comparing them based on population with counties that do participate, like yours, and estimating the number of people experiencing homelessness in those counties based on the data that y'all submit. This is just meant to demonstrate that your data has effects beyond just your community. We're using it to basically just estimate the number of people experiencing homelessness in other counties that are not participating in the point in time count. So that's why we want to make sure that we just ensure data quality, ensure that we ask all questions to participants if possible, work to reduce duplicate responses, and if we can, expand new coverage into areas that haven't been covered in the past. Definitely not required, but we do encourage it. I do want to talk a little bit about who to contact. It's just a flow chart that demonstrates how our roles are going to work together. So if you have like a volunteer that might have questions about shift times or the location of your headquarters on the night of the count, perhaps the assigned count areas, they will contact you, the pit leads. And of course, if they can't reach you, you can always give them my information, especially if you don't have an answer for them. You can reach out to me, the data and engagement coordinator, and I'll have my contact information at the end. And if you can't reach me, you can always reach my supervisor. I'll be giving out the information of me and my supervisor on the night of the point in time count. And if you have any questions about count logistics, like who and where we count, the actual length of the survey questions, and identifying hotspots or technical issues, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. All right. Um, let's talk a little bit about some broad key pit steps here. The first step we want to do is to establish a pit lead. So we want to make sure that we sign up our pit lead and backup, which y'all have already done if you're here. Create a pit committee, start creating a pit committee within your LHC or within your organization, and then create a timeline for your count planning. And then we're going to begin the community awareness portion of the point in time count. So we want to make sure that we inform our community and publicize the count, whether that be, in public spaces like libraries, maybe City Hall, or even like at your church. It could be at something like even on social media or on the internet. That's how a lot of people are communicating now these days. It's a good way to publicize the point in time count. And then we want to start engaging potential members with lived experience. People that are currently or formerly homeless are very valuable to your point in time count. They can help with basically everything from surveying to identifying places where people might be, seeing folks that are experiencing homelessness, unsheltered homelessness. And then we want to engage the community in identifying those unsheltered locations, which we call hotspot mapping. We're going to talk about that a little bit later too. And then solicit donations if possible. Some communities like to do care packages or little goodie bags that have things like food, hygiene items, socks, blankets, stuff like that that you can hand out to folks. Maybe use it as an incentive to get people to actually complete the survey. And then we want to move on to the training portion where we're recruiting volunteers, setting up volunteers with training, and then scheduling in-person meetings if that's something that we want to do. And of course, having our participants and volunteers register with and practice with the application that we use to gather data. For our point in time count, we use an application that you can download on your phone or use on your computer to gather point in time count data. And that's the main way that we're actually gathering this data. So we recommend that people practice if they have time to do that, just so that when they're actually surveying on the night of the count, that they're prepared and they know what they're doing. So let's talk a little bit about who we do count in the pit count. So the count is essentially broken down into two pieces. We have the unsheltered count and the sheltered count. The unsheltered count, which is often referred to as the street count, that's mainly because we're counting people on the streets, in outdoor encampments, and other places not meant for human habitation. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about some of those potential locations a little bit later. And then we do the other half, which I mentioned already, is the sheltered count. So we're counting people in emergency shelters, domestic violence shelters, and transitional housing, as well as a hotel or motel paid for by an agency voucher. So these projects, the reason why we count them is because they are not necessarily permanent housing solutions. They're just meant to provide interim stability towards people that are currently experiencing homelessness. All right, and we're going to talk a little bit about the distinction between emergency shelters and transitional housing a little bit later. But I just want to just make sure it's known that these projects are meant to provide interim stability and not permanent housing, which is why we're counting them in the point in time count. So now that we know who we do count, I do want to talk a little bit about who we're not counting in the pit count. So we're not counting people that are residing in any sort of permanent housing project. So this could be something like permanent supportive housing or a rapid rehousing program, as well as a HUD-VASH project. Or a FEMA project. So those are considered by HUD to be permanent housing, and by that time, people are not considered homeless because it's a permanent housing solution. They live there now. And then we're also not counting people in any sort of temporary living situation. So this might be people that are doubled up with family or friends, at risk of homelessness, or in a hotel or motel paid for out of their own funds, paid for by their out of their own pocket. And then we're also not counting people in shelters designated for foster care. We're not counting people in any sort of sober living or halfway house situation. And then we're also not counting people that are in a criminal justice or health facility like a jail or a hospital on the night of the point in time count. In the eyes of HUD, in their infinite wisdom, they consider these people to be housed in these situations. And not literally homeless by the definition that they use, which is admittedly a very narrow definition, but it's the one that we use for the point in time count. All right, so moving on. This is just a slide meant to demonstrate some considerations for counting people experiencing youth homelessness, and the definition of youth homelessness and kind of how it differs from, you might be aware of a different definition that school districts in your community might use for homelessness. So I have highlighted some phrases here in red font, and the parts in red font are the aspects of the school definition that do not fit into the point in time count definition that we use. So those include children and youths who are sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing or economic hardship or any other similar reason, or are abandoned in a hospital or awaiting foster care placement, as well as any sort of substandard housing situation. So while these students, they might count as homeless within their schools or within their school district, they do not qualify as counting for the actual point in time count itself. All right, so let's keep going here. So let's talk a little bit about the unsheltered pit planning. We're gonna go ahead and get into this real quick, y'all. So the unsheltered pit is often referred to as the street count, and it's basically just a count of individuals who are residing in places not meant for human habitation. So we're just requiring that y'all identify persons that are in places, living in places not meant for human habitation, on January 22nd, which is the night of the point in time count. So beyond that, let's talk about some of these possible locations where you might see people experiencing homelessness. So some of the locations that we can consider for the unsheltered count include things like abandoned buildings, bus stations, train stations, airports, parks, streets, sidewalks, tents, encampments under bridges and overpasses, as well as a vehicle. I think that's a big one that we've started to notice a little bit more in the past few years. People living in their cars, in like a Walmart parking lot or in a camping lot, people living out of their vans, as well as people living in their RVs, especially if that RV is maybe on the side of the road or again in maybe like a Walmart parking lot. And it's not connected to any sort of amenities such as like water, sewage, electricity. It's just kind of there. Pit leads should definitely create a list or a map of common areas where people can be found. This can be used to help inform volunteer routes. And definitely prepare for the unsheltered count by creating your map zones and areas that teams of your volunteers will cover during the count. and seek input from your pit count committee, and especially from people with lived experience when mapping out those survey locations. Um, I will say though that you will definitely need to update your list of locations closer to the actual date of the count, especially in the weeks leading up to the count. As those locations frequented by people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, it may change. It's definitely going to change, actually. We recommend looking for hotspots 1 to 2 weeks before the count, as people tend to not stay in the same place for more than a week, especially if your city has like any sort of like camping ordinance. Or they do any sort of like homeless suite. Sorry, y'all. Losing my voice. Been doing this training a lot this week. Okay. Let's talk about creating hotspot maps. So, like I've mentioned, work together with your community to start a list of locations where you are seeing individuals experiencing homelessness, and then visit those locations at least once a month leading up to the count, and then start visiting them more often in the weeks leading up to it. So this list is definitely going to change over time and will need regular updates. So ensure that you have a process for how people can access that list of locations and how they can send you updates about where they're seeing people experiencing homelessness. And make this a collaborative process. It can help raise awareness for everyone involved. It's important to engage homeless outreach workers, sometimes police, EMS, and by law, especially park officers. It's also important to engage businesses and other aspects of your community, especially if you have faith-based organization like a church involved in the homeless response system in your community. They can also help you identify some of those locations. Undertake some walkabouts in advance of the count date to identify and confirm those locations. You can even let people know that are in those areas that, the count is going to be happening just to raise awareness. Um, and definitely consult people that are currently experiencing homelessness to get a sense of where to canvas and how to approach those potential interviewees, especially in camps. I will say that one big thing about this is different populations that we look at when we're doing surveys tend to stay in different locations. Youth might gravitate towards a more secluded area, such as a forest, whereas a single adult might be more likely to stay on plain view in the streets. Definitely consult a range of stakeholders to ensure that your mapping accurately reflects the diversity of experiences among people experiencing homelessness in your population. You can even look at the data from past years to figure out what populations you're seeing. If you're seeing more youth, they might be in more secluded areas. If you're seeing more families, they might be more likely to stay near a shelter. And if you're seeing more single adults, they might be more visible out on the streets. A lot of things to consider. No one size fits all solution for this. And then definitely recommend, again, coming up with some sort of collaborative document to track those locations, and to update each other on any significant changes. You can create like a collaborative document on Google, sometimes even like Microsoft Word, or create like an email chain also works. So yeah, just some tips for hotspot mapping. So moving on from that, here's a list of potential community partners you can try to engage in the pit. The ones in asterisks are partners that already have specific resources created to help them with engagement that I've put on the website. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more later. This is not an exhaustive list at all. It should be viewed as a starting point to definitely like start driving your outreach efforts. But again, there's other aspects of your community that you can for sure engage. So these parts of your community can help you, again, involve people with lived experience, which is pretty important, help with volunteer recruitment, and also help with that hotspot mapping aspect of finding where those unsheltered locations are. So some of these organizations could be things like DFPS, victim service providers, which are pretty important to involve, especially if you have any sort of DV shelter in your area. Faith-based agencies like a church, Loaves and Fishes, if that is something in your area. Housing authority, your local housing authority is pretty important to involve as well as like code enforcement or any sort of SSVF provider, outreach workers, your existing homeless response system, and as well as homeless education liaisons. All right. These are just some safety considerations, for both pit leads and volunteers. The safety of y'all is a very high priority. So please read over this list and make sure that your volunteers read over this list prior to the night of the count. And this specific list is geared towards people that are doing the unsheltered count, but some of these tips also apply to people doing the sheltered count as well. Overall, I would just say it's important to be mindful of the population that we're serving and understand the situation that they're in. Homelessness, it causes a great deal of physical trauma, psychological trauma. So we always want to be respectful and patient as we go in and survey them. And we don't want to treat them with any sort of disrespect. We want to treat them as they are our own neighbors. Um, the ones that I would say are the most important to me are not to wake people up if they're sleeping, or put people in a situation that might make them uncomfortable. So let's always work in teams. I recommend that you have maybe one person doing the actual surveying itself, and then another person recording the responses. Never have anyone ever go out alone. Be respectful of people's space. Ask the person to participate if you think that they're homeless. We don't want to just walk up to someone and just be like, hey, we're going to do a survey right now. We want to make sure that they consent to the survey. We'll talk about that a little bit more later again. We want to introduce ourselves and explain what we're doing. We have some examples of introductory scripts and how to engage people with the survey itself on our website that I'm going to upload pretty soon. We want to be sincere and caring, remain calm, know how to de-escalate, have people on our teams when we're going out to survey that know how to de-escalate, know emergency numbers, honor requests not to participate, and provide shelter information if possible, if that's something that y'all have in your area. Again, every area is different. Definitely dress appropriately. The weather in Texas is so unpredictable. It could be either super freezing cold or rainy. Just make sure that you wear good walking shoes, and then leave your valuables behind, of course. Of course, we don't want to wake anybody up. We don't want to approach anybody if we don't feel comfortable doing so or mandate participation. I will say those first two are situations in which we would do an observation survey, and I'll talk about that again a little bit more later. I feel like I'm saying that all the time today. We don't want to invade personal space, cross barriers, provide anything that we can't deliver, be judgmental, give money or offer rides, share any confidential info or photos of participants. And we definitely don't want to panic or put anyone in danger. And we don't want to deviate from the survey. The questions, we want to read them as they're written. Alrighty. So these are just the 5 steps to completing the unsheltered survey. Just make sure to start by identifying yourself, and stating the purpose of the count, and remember to obtain consent to the survey. And once you've gotten verbal consent to proceed with the survey, you can begin to ask those screening questions to determine if that individual is eligible. If they're not eligible, we can always thank them for their time and move on. But if they are eligible, let's just administer the survey questions, record their responses, and lastly, ensure that you thank the respondent for their participation, and if possible, provide them with donated items, care packages, or information pamphlets and resources. All right. So here is just a quick list of tips for preparing for the point in time count, specifically geared towards volunteers. So check in with each volunteer before they go in and out for their shifts. Provide volunteers with a checklist at least one day in advance of the things that they're going to need to survey, such as their phone, maybe a mobile battery, anything like that that they can use. We also have resources for this that are going to be uploaded to the website shortly. And then make sure to have a map of the hotspots so they know where they're going, an interviewing guide so that they know what they're doing, and a day of count cheat sheet. I have, again, that resource is going to be on our website as well. Volunteer hour tracker form, as well as emergency phone numbers and instructions for registering for the application. All right. So now let's talk about sheltered pit planning. So for the sheltered count, we're serving people in emergency shelters, which include things like a cold weather shelter, a domestic violence shelter, and hotels or motels that are paid for with agency vouchers, as well as transitional housing. In order to be considered an emergency shelter project or a transitional housing project, they need to meet the following 3 criteria. So the first criteria is that the primary intent of the project is to serve literally homeless people. So sometimes you might have a project where the primary intent is to serve people that are in recovery or foster youth, or other populations. This distinction is pretty important. We just need to make sure that the primary intent of the project is to serve people that are experiencing homelessness. Second criteria is that the project verifies homeless status as part of its eligibility determination, and the actual project clients are predominantly homeless. So if you have a shelter in your area that maybe just popped up, maybe just opened up, and you're unsure if it qualifies for the point in time count, or if you're unsure if it's an emergency shelter or transitional housing project, please reach out to me. I'm going to be looking through that for y'all and making sure that we have the right information before adding it to the actual point in time count. All right. So, these are just some definitions and more detailed explanations of these point in time count locations. So, an emergency shelter is any facility where the primary purpose of which is to provide temporary shelter for the homeless in general or for specific populations of homeless people, which does not require occupants to sign any sort of lease or occupancy agreement. So that includes domestic violence shelters, a hotel or motel or apartment that is paid for by a voucher from a public agency or private agency because the individual is homeless. And then we also have transitional housing, which is designed to provide homeless individuals and families with interim stability and support to successfully move to and maintain permanent housing. So transitional housing may be used to cover the cost of up to 24 months of housing with accompanying supportive services, and the program participants must have some kind of lease or sublease or occupancy agreement in place when residing in transitional housing. That's like the big distinction between the two. Emergency shelter, no occupancy agreement. Transitional housing usually has an occupancy agreement plus some kind of supportive services to help people move to permanent housing. So I'm going to shift just a little bit to talk a little bit about the housing inventory count, just briefly. The reason I think it's important to have these counts in the same presentation is because they happen simultaneously and oftentimes are analyzed together. For those that aren't familiar, the housing inventory count, we also call it the HIC, is the annual count of beds and units designated to those experiencing homelessness. So it includes both emergency shelter and transitional housing, which are counted for the PIT. However, it also includes rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing beds. A simple way to remember this is that the PIT measures people and the HIC measures housing. And when we look at them together, it demonstrates the scope of homelessness in your area, as well as our capacity to actually respond to it. So beyond that, this is just a quick Venn diagram to demonstrate the similarities and differences between the point in time count and the housing inventory count. I won't go into super crazy high detail, but if I were to give just a quick summary, the key differences are the PIT requires individual surveys of each client residing in the emergency shelter or transitional housing program, and each survey takes about 25 to 40 minutes. Whereas the HIC only requires you to fill out one form for each housing project that organization has, which amounts to about 10 to 20 minutes. We're just filling out the bed and unit inventory information as well as any funding that they might receive. The similarities are that they're both required by HUD, they happen at the same time, and I provide technical assistance for both. The PIT is driven by local leads with support from THN, whereas the HIC is driven by THN with support from local leads. All right. That being said, this is a template letter that you can send to potential shelters to solicit their participation in the point in time count. You can find a downloadable template of this on the Texas Homeless Network website. I'm going to, again, be uploading a lot of resources to there pretty soon, so please be on the lookout for that. All right, so I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the specific process for surveying a domestic violence shelter. To give you some context, the point in time count is only gathering information on those who are actively fleeing a domestic violence situation. The question is not necessarily asking if someone has ever experienced domestic violence. It's specifically asking, because of dating violence, sexual violence, or stalking, are you homeless now because of that? So the question on the slide is the exact language in the point in time count app. We want to make sure that we're using the same language when we're surveying survivors of domestic violence. And it reads, are you currently staying in this shelter because of domestic violence, including dating violence, sexual violence, and or stalking? Okay, so just some do's and don'ts for surveying DV survivors at a shelter. We definitely want to explain that the survey is confidential and all identifying information is removed for their safety. We want to use initials or a code for their name. If they don't want to give you their initials, code is just fine, or leaving it blank is also okay. Fill out their age range, complete the remainder of the survey with them, and write in the notes section that they are a survivor of domestic violence so I can make sure that there's no identifying information within the point in time count application and make sure that their location is secure and anonymous and provide any information on support that your pit lead provided to you. So you'll provide this information to your volunteers. So definitely don't fill in their full name in the point in time count app or fill in their date of birth, fill in their exact age, or provide any identifying information in the notes section. So we don't want to pressure participants into answering any questions that they don't feel comfortable answering or express disbelief or pity to answers on the survey by survivors. So this is just a screenshot of what your mobile app and the beginning section of your survey would look like if you're surveying a domestic violence survivor. Again, you'll be filling out the entire survey with participants. You're only skipping the full name, date of birth, and exact age section. We recommend putting in initials for DV survivors and age ranges, but no other identifying information such as their sex or their race or their ethnicity. All right. Just some quick coordination tips for your shelter count. We just recommend that you prep everything that those shelters are going to need in advance to the count, and verify those list of shelters as soon as possible. So basically, what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks is I'm going to be sending out a list of emergency shelters and transitional housing projects in the coming weeks to you that I need y'all to make sure that you confirm that those shelters are still open. If they're closed, let me know. And um, to provide contact information for those shelters as well. So please also remain in regular contact with the staff at the shelters just to ensure that you have a solid game plan to see if they'll need any additional volunteers to help conduct the surveys on the day of the point in time count. And again, please be respectful of their processes and procedures, especially when you're developing strategies for the day of the count. And it's your role to ensure that all staff that will be serving at these sheltered locations have taken the appropriate trainings and are aware of the particular processes and procedures that that shelter has in place. Or if they need help surveying. Um, all right. Definitely like loop me in if you have any questions or if you need help soliciting participation from certain shelters. In the past, we have had some trouble getting certain shelters involved in the point in time count. And if you need help with that, please let me know. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of making sure that we get people to consent to the survey. Again, like I mentioned, we don't want to just walk up to people and be like, we're doing a survey right now. That's going to make it really hard for them to engage, and it's a very jarring experience for them. We are only permitted to conduct a survey on an individual if we have obtained verbal consent to do so. We don't want to complete the survey if we haven't had persons say, yes, I want to do this survey. Or if we haven't even physically laid eyes on the individual on the day of the count. If the person wants to leave the conversation, stop the survey and definitely submit it. If they revoke their consent and ask you to delete the survey responses, please make sure that you do so. Absolutely don't try to convince someone or coerce them or persuade them into actually participating in the point in time count survey. If you're unable to complete a shelter or unsheltered survey for the following reasons, someone tells you, hey, I don't want to do the survey, we can always have the option of doing a observation survey, which is what we're going to talk about next. So the observation survey, it can be conducted in both sheltered and unsheltered locations. You will use the observation survey, if someone might be sleeping or you don't feel comfortable going into a certain area, or the person did not give their consent to the survey itself, and don't want to complete the survey in its entirety. Um, Especially if someone doesn't seem to understand the consent process or they cannot reasonably consent to the survey. Perhaps they're sleeping or indisposed. We never know what someone's situation might be. So in those kinds of situations, we'll fill out an observation survey. The one thing I will stress, again, like I mentioned before, let's not fill out any observation surveys on people that we haven't physically laid eyes on the day of the count. All right. I do want to mention observation surveys should not be the first tool in your tool belt when it comes to surveying individuals. Our goal is to complete as many interview surveys as possible, and we should not be using the observation survey as the first survey that you choose when going out on the night of the count of the point in time count. So you should first be trying to ask for consent to the interview survey, and then the observation survey is like a last resort, only for situations where we can't physically interview someone. We don't want to go around gathering observation surveys of people that we haven't talked to, or gather observation surveys of people who are not homeless or unhoused. We don't want to use surveys as a primary tool on our night of the count. So beyond that, I want to talk about this decision tree that was created just to help pit leads and volunteers determine which survey to choose based on which situation that they might be in. It's color coded based on the survey type. Red and orange just indicates the decisions leading to the observation survey, and the dark blue is for participants that are not eligible to be surveyed, which happens again if the person reports to you that they're not homeless. The purple is for unsheltered surveys, the green is for sheltered surveys. So going into this, let's say that you encounter someone that you believe is experiencing homelessness. And you're in a situation where that person is safe to approach, and you ask for consent, and they consented to the survey. Based on their location, we'll fill out a survey. If it's a sheltered location, we'll do a sheltered survey. If it's an unsheltered location, we'll do an unsheltered survey. Let's say that the person is safe to approach, but they didn't consent to the survey, or the person couldn't consent to the survey because they were sleeping or didn't understand the consent process. In those cases, we're going to do an observation survey. Let's say that we approach someone and they reported to us, hey, I'm not homeless. We'll thank them for their time. We'll not complete a survey. But let's say that we encounter someone we believe is experiencing homelessness, and we're in a situation where it's unsafe to approach. Maybe there's barriers, maybe it's a very wooded area. In those situations, we'll do an observation survey. All right, so these are just some overall guidelines for how to follow best practices when it comes to conducting the point in time count. Definitely familiarize yourself with the survey. Practice reading the questions out loud. Practice giving your introduction script out loud. Have your volunteers do this so that they're comfortable and know what they're doing on the night of the count. We want to make sure that people are confident when they're surveying. Communicate your intentions to prospective survey participants. Let them know what you're doing. We want to make sure that people are aware of what's happening. Obtain consent to administer the survey. Express confidence and compassion. And when serving individuals within a group, prioritize safety and protect participants' information. Maybe you have a group of 5 or 6 people. We can individually survey them, and maybe separating them a little bit from the group just so that their information is safe. And whenever possible, attempt to give participants as much privacy as they request. Let's honor requests not to participate. Let's honor requests not to answer certain questions that might not be easy for them to answer. Again, homelessness causes a great deal of psychological and physical trauma, and that manifests itself in different ways. So if they don't want to answer a certain question, that's more than okay. As long as we're making sure that we're asking them, we're doing the right thing. Come up with a safety phrase for discomfort among your team if you're in a situation where you feel uncomfortable. Know the expectations for your volunteers. Know the resources within your community. All right. I do want to talk a little bit about the service-based count. So some of you might have opted into this in the past, some of you might have not. So the service-based count is an optional supplemental count which can be used in conjunction with the actual night of the count approach. You must participate in the actual night of the count approach in order to opt into the service-based count. So the service-based count occurs at non-shelter service locations, such as a day shelter, maybe a youth drop-in center, a food bank, any sort of location like that, where those experiencing homelessness are seeking out resources, are seeking out help. In order to participate in this count, you need to notify me before December, and you will also need to provide a list of locations at the end of December. Any surveys that are not conducted at those particular locations will be archived. I need to know those locations because if I'm getting data coming in after the night of the count and it's the service-based count, I want to make sure that those people stay counted. So if you have any more questions about the service-based count, maybe you're interested in your community participating in it and want more information, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, you'll already have my contact information. Feel free to email me, call me, leave me a voicemail. All right. So just a quick reminder about paper surveys. So the main method that we use to gather the data for the point in time count is on our phones using the application that we use every year. We also have paper surveys. We do have them, and we're willing to work with your community on using them. However, again, we strongly urge that you have your volunteers use the app itself. It not only helps with data quality, but it also ensures that there's less room for error in case your surveys get lost. And you're only permitted to use the paper surveys if you do opt into them. You can only use the paper surveys that we provide just for consistency and to make sure that we're asking all the same questions with the same language. You're required to send all the paper surveys to THN directly after you input them. If you need help inputting them, please let me know. That's something that I could definitely help with. And any other paper surveys created by anyone other than THN will not be utilized for the point in time count. So I recommend coming up with a plan for entering the paper surveys into the app by February 2nd. If that's something that's not feasible, please let me know. I'm very flexible when it comes to these kinds of things, and I'm more than willing to help out with entering any sort of paper survey data. So there are many roles that volunteers can play leading up to and during the actual point in time count. Your community will need to determine the number of volunteers you require and the skills and experiences that they should have. Once you determine the number of volunteers you will need, develop a process to assign them to teams. For example, assign the team leader role to volunteers who have experience working with the homeless population. And regardless of their relevant experience, assign the team leader role to only volunteers who are interested in a leadership position. All right, just quickly moving on. Um, so I do recommend that you have some sort of process to debrief with your point in time count volunteers. You should develop both a critical incident and debrief protocol, as well as a general feedback form to help gauge how the process went, as well as the likelihood that people might return for the next point in time count. If there are any critical incidents, please share those with me immediately so that we can work with you addressing that issue with you and your community and provide support to you and your volunteers. All right. This is just a sample debrief form. It will also be available on our website for download, and you can use paper surveys or free survey software like Google Forms to debrief with your volunteers and figure out how the process is going for you and improve year after year as you participate in the point in time count. All right, y'all, getting through it. Just 10 more slides, then we're done. Again, appreciate y'all being here with me today. Okay, so as you begin planning for your count, consider how this initiative can be an effective way to engage your community in the effort to end homelessness, and also recognize that the success of the count depends on effective community engagement. A pick count can help you inform and educate key stakeholders within your community, and this can include the general public, media, policymakers, and especially the business sector and the social services sector. We're kind of engaging all these different aspects of our community, and this cross-sector collaboration encourages participation in the actual homeless response system and can provide additional resources to support the count, including things like money, volunteers, supplies, and expert knowledge. And the count can help your community understand and address homelessness differently. The process of planning and implementing the count it could definitely generate more cross-sector collaboration and coordination that can be used as leverage as you implement other initiatives, like maybe implementing a shelter, implementing like a soup kitchen or a day shelter or something like a food bank. This can also include like a plan to end homelessness within your community, some kind of housing first program, system coordination or by name lists, doing the count collaboratively and engaging these different aspects of our community in our pit committees, in our volunteer engagement, and in spreading awareness and engaging the media as well can facilitate new alliances and again strengthen those partnerships. At a minimum, I would say though, you should consider how you will use this information that you obtain during the counts to generate action on homelessness, which does require a lot of cross-sector collaboration. Just a quick conversation about engaging law enforcement. There are a few things to consider when engaging law enforcement in your point in time count. We've had law enforcement engaged in different levels of the point in time count. Some people actually have the law enforcement do the surveying. Sometimes we even have law enforcement that are actually planning the point in time count itself. So it's important to consider, how law enforcement plays a role in homelessness in your community. Does your local law enforcement have a homeless outreach team? Are they expressing interest in participating in your local homeless coalition or your pit count? And have you noticed any changes in their responses to the statewide camping ban? Are they arresting people? Are they doing sweeps? And what role have they played in the past, and how has that gone? All of these questions to be considered before choosing to engage law enforcement in the upcoming point in time count. This definitely varies based on location. Sometimes they are doing sweeps and they are arresting people. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they actually have a homeless outreach team. It really depends on your community. Um, these are just some best practices to consider for engaging law enforcement. Again, we recommend that uniformed law enforcement should not be actually surveying unhoused people. We want to make sure that if they are surveying people, that they're in unmarked cars and that they're in plain clothes. We don't want it to feel like a police interaction where they feel like they're about to get arrested. The primary roles of the point in time count for law enforcement should be limited to, maybe helping your community identify those hot spots before the count and keeping you appraised on any significant changes that they might see, and to be available to respond to potential volunteer safety concerns on the day of the count. And we absolutely don't want to be ticketing or arresting people on the day of the count. That's only going to make it harder for them to exit homelessness. Consider if there's a way to develop some kind of memorandum of understanding with them that if they are going to be helping out on the night of the count, that they're not going to be arresting people. And if you have concerns about law enforcement impeding your count, please let me know. That's something that I'm definitely willing to mediate. I've worked with several law enforcement agencies in the past and making sure that their pit counts go smoothly and that people are not being arrested. If you need to, you can minimize public facing messaging around the actual date itself and see if they'd be willing to attend a training like this one or meetings focused on combating the myths around homelessness. I'd be more than willing to talk with people. I like to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table when it comes to ending homelessness. If that's something that I can help facilitate, please let me know. And reach out to other regional partners or THN to see if we can provide any other additional support in making sure that your counts go smoothly. Okay. I do want to see that engaging all three of these subpopulations is very important to a successful point in time count. Survivors of domestic violence, youth and families, and veterans, which is why we created separate trainings for them. Those are going to be uploaded to the website very soon. So please make sure to check those out when you get the opportunity. And just one quick conversation about engaging subpopulations in your community. Think about what subpopulations in your community are the most prevalent. And what populations in your community are you already engaging? Which populations are you not engaging? And what community partners are missing from your communities in order to better engage those populations? And if you need to add people to those groups. So if you need any logistical support for identifying those subpopulations, such as families, youth, or veterans in your community, and ways to bring those stakeholders to the table and engage them better, please let me know, especially when it comes to recruiting people with lived experience. Again, which I've been saying a lot in this training. We want to make sure that we create plans to specifically include those groups in the point in time count planning process. All right. And again, people with lived experience, engaging those people is a very important resource to a successful point in time count. And we want to make sure that they're actively involved in the point in time count. So we want to identify the desired roles needed for the point in time count and determine what incentives or compensations are available to currently or formerly homeless people to participate in the point in time count. And we want to make sure that they're involved early and often in the planning process to make sure that we have the best informed best practices for the actual point in time count itself. And we want to be sensitive to any sort of shelter restrictions that could limit their participation, such as if they are living in a program that might have a curfew or any other requirements that they need to meet. I just want to take 1 minute also to remind everyone that if you're recruiting people with lived experience, especially those that are currently experiencing homelessness, you want to make sure that we pay them for their time. So they're experts and they should be treated as such. We want to pay them, and I specifically recommend paying with them with money. One thing that I heard from the most recent conference on ending homelessness is that gift cards are great, but gift cards don't pay rent. We want to make sure that we're paying them with money if we're engaging people that are currently experiencing homelessness in the point in time count, if possible. All right. So, that being said, I want to talk a little bit about some of the updates on the 2026 point in time count as we continue to move forward into pit season. I will say that we are going to be having a pre-count Counting Us and Regional Command Center app webinar that goes over the application that we use to gather the data for the point in time count. That's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks, probably the first week or second week of November. And then we're going to be doing a post-count how to read your pit data webinar that's going to be happening in November as well. I'm going to be doing that for local homeless coalitions and anybody that's interested in reading their point in time count data from the past year. Um, I'm also going to be having pre-recorded volunteer trainings that are going to be released in December. And you can also request me to give a virtual volunteer training anytime between October to January. Just give me a few weeks notice and I can make sure to set that up for you. We'll also have some more supplemental materials that are going to be released, such as pre-recorded volunteer training videos and Counting Us app training, just general training for people. And I'm also offering this year for the first time possible in-person trainings available. If you want me to come to your community and gather together with people and talk about the point in time count, that's something that I can absolutely do. It's going to be a first come, first serve basis. So if that's something that you might be interested in, please reach out to me ASAP. I'm also going to have the same opportunities for one-on-one style support calls. So there'll be a form that'll go out pretty soon if you need individual support with your community or have a very specific question that you want to get on a call with me and talk about. And also going to be doing office hours style support calls, which is kind of a meeting like this where we can all chat about strategies that we're using for pit planning and to ask questions. I'm going to be doing that November through January. And there'll also be a series of additional presentations posted to the website, again, to help you engage those with lived experience, youth, veterans, and victim service providers. Okay, so last thing that we'll talk about is the tentative timeline. My screen just went out. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know what's going on with this monitor, y'all. Hold, please. I'm so sorry, y'all. Goodness. Okay, there it goes. Hopefully you can see this. Okay, so here's just a quick timeline for the most important events to note for the upcoming point in time count. October, we're having our mandatory pit training right now. We're going to finalize our shelter list. I'm going to be sending out that list of shelters in your area in the next couple weeks and begin mapping those unsheltered locations. And then in November, we want to begin volunteer recruitment and community engagement, as well as mobile app training. And that will also be our deadline to sign up for service-based count or any other paper surveys if that's something that you're interested in. And we're also going to start our office hours sport calls starting in November. And then through December, we're going to continue our volunteer recruitment. And of course, pit leads and communities can sign up for one-on-one support calls. We're also going to have refresher materials to be released and volunteer training materials released as well. And then in January, we're going to start holding those volunteer trainings, finalize the shelter engagement plan, and look over training materials and presentations. And then on the 22nd, that Thursday, the 22nd, we're actually going to conduct the point in time count itself. All right, just some next steps. Again, we're going to be scheduling that mobile app training in the next couple of weeks. So just be on the lookout for the email for that. It's mandatory, just like this training. We're going to go over everything you need to know about the Regional Command Center that we use to look at the data, as well as the Counting Us app that volunteers and you will use to gather the data itself. Try to start to create your point in time count committee. Be on the lookout for that sheltered location list that's going to come out from me. Start developing your volunteer recruitment plan if you can, and then request volunteer trainings if needed. Again, if that's something that you want me to do virtually or in person, please let me know. Again, on a first come, first serve basis in December and January. And then be on the lookout for those support call opportunities. Okay. All that being said, that is pretty much all I have for today. I'll let y'all come off mute if you have any questions, or feel free to type them in the chat. This is also my contact information here. If you need to contact me for anything, I am available for you. I'm here to make sure that your point in time count is successful. So please feel free to call me or leave me a voicemail or email me at any time. Best way to reach me is probably email, but yeah, if y'all have any questions, feel free to come off mute. We got like 5 minutes, but I'm willing to stay overtime if there are more questions.
Hi, this is Jeanette in Williamson County.
Hello.
Hi, so I do have a question. I noticed the timeline that you just now posted on that last slide. It said to start holding volunteer trainings in January.
Mhm.
I feel like last year and the year before, maybe we did it in November, December. I don't know. Is it, can we not do it? I can't remember at the moment because I'm not looking at my calendar when we actually did it. But is that a hard date that we should not train volunteers until January, or is that a suggestion?
It's just a suggestion. Sometimes we
Okay.
recommend January because, that's the closest time to the point in time count. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
if we do it over the holidays, some people might forget stuff. But if it works better for you and your community, absolutely December is fine. Some people start in November even. That's okay too.
Okay.
Whatever works best for you, and I'm willing to support you no matter what you decide to choose.
Okay. Okay. So we'll talk about it some more on our team. We were thinking to have one in person and then one virtual
Okay,
because some people just can't make it. Okay, that was helpful. Thank you.
of course. Thank you.
And will you be sending out these slides or?
Yes, I will be
Yes,
sending
okay.
out these slides.
Okay, I missed that in the beginning. Okay, thank you. This was very helpful. Thanks.
Of course. Anything else, y'all? Any takers? Okay, cool. Well, thank y'all so much again for being here today, and hearing my spiel for like an hour. I'm losing my voice now, but I'm gonna have this recorded and uploaded to YouTube. And if you have any other questions, please let me know. I'm gonna be here all week and all month, and yeah, probably forever. Anyway, have a great rest of your day. See y'all
Yeah,
soon.
thank you, Ava. Good job.
Thank you. Bye.